I'm not going to lie to the Australian people or mislead them.
I might just hold you to that, Peter. It's been a big few days for the opposition leader, who's clearly picked the hill he's prepared to die on, as his No Guy campaign kicked off in Alice Springs. I started this video after seeing Dutton's first Alice Springs press conference, where he stood alongside Sky News' favourite baker.
The guy who owned the bakery, Darren Clark.
Darren Clark.
The owner of that bakery, Darren Clark.
Darren Clark.
Darren Clark. Once again, Dave Clark joins us.
Dave.
Dave, thanks so much for your time. You own a bakery there in Alice. Darren Clark there. We'll see you soon, Darren.
Local baker, Darren Clark.
As a founder of the Action for Alice Facebook page, Darren found himself in the spotlight when the page blew up earlier this year, when Facebook issued a temporary ban.
A website called Action for Alice. This website is run by Darren Clark.
That Facebook page, Action for Alice, has thrust the town into the national spotlight.
I'm the only one that's shown the truth in this town.
Tomorrow marks 3 years since I started the page. And before that, there was 6 months of just turmoil in this town. I had meetings with government. They told me they were working on it. Everything would be sorted out, but it just continued.
When he's not on Sky, he's popping up for a chat on Today.
Well, you're there. You're there. We can feel it.
I am here, mate.
He's a sucker for media.
There was this time, back in 2015, where his business was reported to have received almost $1 million in funding from the federal government. In 2018, he had the ear of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, alongside Jacinta Price, who was then running as a country Liberal Party candidate. Darren also popped up on A Current Affair in 2021 to talk about the crime problems in Alice Springs.
But I digress.
Given the frequency that he's appeared on Sky News, probably shouldn't have been a surprise to see him standing up next to Peter Dutton at the press conference last week. Peter was so pleased with Darren's contribution, he tweeted it.
We're seriously in trouble in this town. We've got young kids in trouble. No one cares for them. Our territory government doesn't care for them. Our federal government's not caring for them. We've got the people, the elderly people in this town, nursing homes are being broken into twice this week. Elderly people being broken into in the suburbs here, being bashed. We can't drive from one side of town to the other of a night. We're in a self-imposed curfew in Alice Springs and nothing's been done. It's just escalated and escalated. We've lost a life here, lost a life in Darwin, and I'm telling you now, we will lose more lives, and we can't have that.
Did you catch that? Some eagle-eyed viewers did. Hat tip to the captain.
Curfew in Alice Springs, and nothing's been... We're in a self-imposed curfew in Alice Springs. This town now for 4 years has been allowed to go to rack and ruin. I've fought for 3-4 years for this, to save this town, and nothing's been done. It's just escalated and escalated.
For 4 years. 4 years, he says. Now, it's probably fairly obvious why Dr. No would want to have that part edited out. While Dutton and his friends may try to pitch the problems faced in Alice Springs as things that have only popped up in the last 6 months, these aren't issues that have only sprung up overnight. As Darren says,
4 years.
The Coalition were in a position to take action for more than 3 of those 4 years. But what did they do? Well, as the Secretariat of National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare point out, the Coalition cut more than $500 million in funding to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services, and another nearly $80 million to Aboriginal and child family centres that supported vulnerable children and families.
But there's more.
There are stories that we've heard today as we've walked the streets about the dysfunction, the desperation of young Indigenous kids who are being sexually assaulted still on a regular basis. That hasn't stopped. We need to have an understanding of what it means to take kids who we know are being sexually abused and put back into the hands of the abuser. There is nothing in the Indigenous culture that makes that acceptable. I can tell you now, if there was a young boy or girl who had been sexually assaulted in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Canberra, and the police were putting that little white boy or girl back into the hands of the abuser, it would be the front page of every newspaper until the commissioner of that state or territory said that it was not going to happen. Yet here somehow it's accepted as normal practice.
As if his first press conference wasn't enough, Dutton doubled down the next day.
Did someone say KFC?
Things took a turn for him though when he was asked a question.
You've mentioned again today the so-called rampant rates of child sexual abuse in Central Australia. Now we've seen the SNAICC, which advocates for Indigenous children, come out and strongly reject your call for a Royal Commission into that. They've labelled it an uninformed approach. Why do you think those kind of peak bodies are rejecting those calls by you, and what evidence do you have that there is this so-called rampant child sexual abuse occurring in remote Central Australia?
Well, with respect, that's such an ABC question.
An ABC question? Asking for evidence to back up a claim is an ABC question? That really should be the standard then, shouldn't it? For comparison, I wonder what a Sky News question is.
Give me a break, man.
Do you live locally? Do you speak to people on the streets? Do you hear what it is they're saying to you? Do you believe...
I live locally.
You live locally. You don't believe there's any problem here?
OK, we've got to leave that there because we're going to our break. That was live from Alice Springs, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton.
Interestingly, the ABC cut away just as things were getting spicy. Not surprisingly, Sky News have been happy to flog most of what followed.
You live locally. You don't believe there's any problem here?
No, I'm asking you, what evidence do you have that there
Well,
is?
I've spoken to the police and the social workers, some of whom are out on stress leave at the moment because of the scenes that they've endured. They have kids taking them back into homes where they've been sexually assaulted and 6-year-olds grabbing onto their legs, screaming not to be left there. So they're the people who are on the front line. I don't know what the academics are saying. I don't know what the bureaucrats are saying. I can tell you, though, what the human experience is on the front line. And if the ABC and others don't see fit to report that, then frankly, I think it reflects more on the ABC than it does on the locals here. And I don't think you're doing your job if you're denying the reality of the circumstances on the ground.
Again, not surprisingly, Sky hasn't included the conclusion of the exchange, where Dutton is once again asked to provide evidence to support his claims.
Of the circumstances on the ground.
I'm not denying a reality. I'm asking you, what data are you using to support your claims here? You're speaking to...
I've answered that question, so if there's a more sensible one, I'd be happy to take it.
Sorry.
Without actually answering the question, Dutton states that he has answered it and he pushes on. Look, I haven't seen anyone suggest that there isn't a crime problem in Alice Springs. According to the data from the Northern Territory Police, there clearly is. Remember, Alice Springs has a population of just under 26,000 at last count, which should give these numbers some context. The problems are complex. They're not going to be solved in a YouTube video. And they definitely aren't going to be solved by politicians flying in and out of Alice Springs to use it as a prop for their own political agenda. Now, if Dutton was to have just focused on crime, his Alice Springs excursion may not have generated as much controversy, but he didn't.
Young Indigenous kids who are being sexually assaulted still on a regular basis, of what it means to take kids who we know are being sexually abused and put back into the hands of the abuser. Here, somehow, it's accepted as normal practice.
So here's the thing, as much as the crime rate in Alice Springs is increasing, there's no evidence to support Dutton's claims here. SNAICC have addressed Dutton's claims before, and have provided data to refute them. SNAICC have noted that children are being removed from family at an unacceptable rate, but they highlight that neglect is by far the higher reason for removal. SNAICC have invited Dutton and Price to meet with them for an evidence-based discussion on the issues. However, that invitation has not yet been taken up. Perhaps understandable given that the organisation has stated that years of failure to invest in and reform early childhood, child protection and family support systems is leading to a devastating impact upon the community. Did I mention that Dutton was a member of the government that cut hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services, including to child family centres? As the ABC noted, Dutton has quite often gone to this well.
So this is something that Peter Dutton brings up quite regularly around abuse of Indigenous children, and he's often reprimanded by experts in this area who believe that he's using this as somewhat of a political football. Now, today he was asked what sort of data he had to support his repeated calls for a Royal Commission into sexual abuse of Indigenous children, and he became quite irritated presented with the question, and both he and Jacinta Price spoke on the issue, but they didn't actually provide data or figures that are informing these calls. They used anecdotal evidence. Now, it's important to note here that the Northern Territory has very strict mandatory reporting laws when it comes to abuse of children, and some of the examples that Senator Price spoke about should have been captured under those laws in particular. But this is something that comes up quite often with Peter Dutton. It's an issue that he revisits regularly. It's something that experts have warned him in his approach to, including the peak body for Indigenous children, the Secretariat of National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare. We also heard from members of the local Aboriginal community on this. One of those people is Graham Smith. He's the chair of the Luratipa Aboriginal Corporation. That's a group that owns several businesses in Alice Springs and says it contributes around $20 million annually to the local economy. Mr Smith says he's been trying to get a meeting with Mr Dutton but has been unsuccessful, and he believes that the only reason Mr Dutton is in Alice Springs is to use the situation there as a platform for his no campaign. Now, that's something that the local Arende community and the local mayor, Matt Patterson, have said they don't want to happen. Now, Mr Dutton's office have provided the ABC with some statistics on crime in Alice Springs. However, none of those statistics refer to child abuse. We are yet to hear if he's planning to come forward with any official evidence or empirical data that back up his repeated claims.
Here's Senator McCarthy reminding Dutton and Price of their obligations under Northern Territory law.
The first thing I would say to Opposition Leader Peter Dutton is this. It is a very serious allegation to raise the abuse of a child, and a serious allegation to make that a child is being returned to an abuser. I would ask Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, if you are aware of this, then you need to mandatory report it to police so that there can be an investigation immediately. And if you haven't done that, I would urge you to do so as soon as possible.
So far, it appears that neither Dutton nor Price have reported any of their claims. The data around this is not easy to report on. Unlike a lot of data, it's rarely as simple as popping up a single table to justify a position. I'm looking at you, Sky News. The first thing to say is the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare data is not comparable by state. This is quite common across all of their data sets, to be honest. After showing a few tables, Sky News inadvertently acknowledged one of the issues with the AIHW data, and why it really can't be used to substantiate Dutton's claims.
It doesn't break those numbers down for Aboriginality.
AIHW have published data on the breakdown of Indigenous and non-Indigenous children in child protection though. Again, caveat, it's not really comparable across states. The other issue? Well, this data is from 2020 to 2021. This is a time when the Coalition were in government. How many press conferences was Dutton holding in Alice Springs back then? Or Morrison for that matter? How many stories were Sky News running on this issue? Catherine Little, CEO of SNAICC, was also interviewed on ABC Radio, providing further information to refute Dutton's claims. It's worth listening to.
Peter Dutton says young Indigenous kids are being sexually assaulted on a regular basis in Alice Springs. Is that your organisation's assessment of the situation in Alice Springs?
Oh, listen, we're a peak body. What we do is bring together information from a whole heap of different sources, in particular our members. So our members are organisations that work directly with families and children, and they are saying there is an absolute need for more service delivery, but the evidence coming through is not lining up with those claims. Does it exist? Absolutely it exists. It's abhorrent. It is absolutely abhorrent and needs services to be able to respond to it. But there is nothing coming through that shows that it is escalating. There is certainly a need for it to be addressed. And I think more concerning is when you hear claims of child sexual abuse, it is really, really serious. And in the Northern Territory, it is a legal requirement that the moment you hear that, you report it so that it can be investigated. And I'm not hearing anyone say that while they've been in the Northern Territory, that Peter Dutton has made a mandatory report. The obligation in the Northern Territory, the legal requirement in the Northern Territory is that if you have heard an allegation of child sexual abuse, you must report it so that it can be investigated. Even if you've heard it from another party, you must report it. The evidence at this point in time doesn't show that. So there is nothing in the stats coming through from the Child Protection Services, from the Aboriginal organisations that work on the ground in direct contact with these families and communities, or from the hospitals. There's no evidence showing an increase in an escalation. There were 10 years. We're talking about a government that has only just, the Liberal government's only just lost the election. For 10 years, we were screaming for the need to be able to investigate what's going on based on the calls of a royal commission, 2 royal commissions in actual fact, that said if you want to know what's going on, install an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Commissioner, and nothing moved. They did not listen. They did not listen to the voice of the communities, the voice of the children, the voice of the sectors that informed those royal commissions. The stats aren't showing that it's higher in the territory than other parts of the country. And again, that's the evidence that is based on reports. So that is why people need to report. The other thing that's really fundamental to the need for people to report, because there is always in any community, and you'd be silly not to say it, in any community there is going to be a level of underreporting. What's really significant in the Northern Territory is, again, during the last 10 years, there was a $500 million cut to service delivery to Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. So they're your safe door, right? They're the doors that Aboriginal people walk into and say, I've got a problem, because these are really difficult conversations. Like you said, who do you report to? How do you report this? If there isn't a safe door to walk through where you can say, I'm worried, you can't report it. We're talking about $500 million of cuts. And again, if you want to talk about specifically how we protect children, all the evidence again shows that if we have access to really high quality early childhood supports, we hear about these things faster and are able to respond faster. Again, at this point in time, no evidence, and again, it gets back to the evidence that we are seeing an increase in child sexual abuse. Alice Springs is the perfect example of why we actually need a voice, because what we understand is that every time we come up with a solution, and communities have been coming up with solutions for a very long time, and again, those solutions are the ones put forward to things like commissioners and royal commissioners, and that voice has not been listened to. Those solutions have been not listened to, or you might get a pilot here or a pilot there. So when governments come in, they come in with their own platform and, those things they got elected on, without a voice, without a voice that is absolutely capturing the needs of communities and responding to the needs of communities. We're always going to be hit by election cycles and whoever's in government.
Peter Dutton often says he's met with grassroots organisations and community leaders. Has he met with you?
No, never. We have invited Peter Dutton to meet with us before, and we maintain that we're more than happy to chat with him and talk to him about what is actually coming through from the sector. Our understanding is, in Alice Springs, Mr Dutton didn't meet with any of the Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, not even Luratupa, which is the traditional owners, or Congress or Tunganjira, or any of those of those organisations that have direct contact with Aboriginal children and Aboriginal families.
Appearing on Insiders, Jacinta Price was repeatedly asked about the claims and whether or not they'd reported them to police.
So are you aware of children being sexually abused and then returned to their abuser?
What I'm aware of, and being a long-term local, and somebody who's fought to be in the position that I am, because I'm acutely aware of the circumstances on the ground in a place like Alice Springs. While the media have turned this into a beat Peter Dutton up exercise, the truth remains he was here because of his concerns. These issues have been issues that I have been campaigning on for a very, very long time.
Just coming back to the question though, are there specific cases that Peter Dutton's talking about of kids being returned to the hands of their abusers?
This is what I'm saying. So these are the concerns of foster parents and people who have had these experiences. They have been through these experiences. So these aren't made up claims.
Do they need to be reported to police then?
They've gone through the processes. It is failings by territory families to actually uphold the human rights of these children.
Sorry, sticking with the immediate concern for kids, does Peter Dutton, or indeed yourself, Senator, need to report any of this to police? Are there kids right now who are being put in danger?
Look, David, we're not stupid. Peter Dutton is a former policeman. He knows what needs to be done. I'm talking about circumstances where these things have taken place, where Territory Families has known about these circumstances. Oh, well, if that's what Territory Families know about them.
Shouldn't you, under the mandatory reporting requirements, laws, report this to police to make sure?
David, what I'm saying is this is what has been done. The problem isn't this, the reporting's been done.
Just so viewers are aware, are you suggesting Territory Families are putting kids in the hands of abusers? I mean, that's a very serious allegation.
That's right, and this is what foster parents have been telling me.
Are you passing any of that on to police?
Hearing. Of course, like I said.
Based on comments from the Northern Territory Police Minister, neither Dutton nor Price have reported anything. These are really serious issues and they deserve to be treated as such. They shouldn't be treated as just another political prop. And in my view, that's how they've been treated here, as a prop, just like Alice Springs itself. At the end of the day, the first stop on Dutton's No tour was all about him. If either Dutton or Price had any genuine concerns around these issues, they would have taken the time to meet with the relevant groups while they were in Alice Springs. Instead, it seems they preferred to do their own research. How exactly? Well, it sounds like they ran vox pops on the main street and they caught up with the local baker. Is this how the lead up to the referendum is going to be?